the Refugees and Migrants Conference. I'm so sorry that I can't be there today. I'm Shami Chakrabarti, the Director of Liberty. Unfortunately, there's a really important vote in the House of Lords today on secret courts and shutting out claimants and their lawyers from the courtroom when the government wants to rely on secret evidence. And so it's really important that I'm here in London with my colleagues to see what we can do. It's a real honour to be asked to participate in your conference, even if I have to do it by this virtual means, because it's an incredibly important time for rights and freedoms in the United Kingdom. And as always, it's the most vulnerable in society who have the most to lose. Our human rights framework is under attack. It's under attack all over the world, but it's particularly troubling that it should be so directly attacked so often in Britain, the oldest unbroken democracy on earth, and a country that played such an important part in the struggle for rights and freedoms and in the development of international human rights ideals after World War II. A little context about Liberty. We were formed as the National Council for Civil Liberties in 1934, which may seem like a very different time a long time ago. Of course, it was before reality TV and the discovery of DNA, before the internet and social media. Very different time in so many ways, and yet it was a time of great economic depression and uncertainty. It was between the wars, and the long shadow of war was still cast. It was a time when certain British newspapers that are still in existence today would often run headlines about how Britain was being invaded by refugees from Eastern Europe. And in particular, our organisation was formed because hunger marchers who'd come to London to assemble in Hyde Park, they'd come all the way from the north of the country, peaceful dissenters found themselves brutally met by the Metropolitan Police. Peaceful dissent in the struggle for rights and freedoms shut down by police brutality, and that was the spark that led a small group of people, probably much smaller than the group that you are meeting today, decided to do something about it. They had no blogs and tweets to write, so they wrote a letter to the Manchester Guardian newspaper, as it was then called, and they said, "We are horrified at the brutality that we have seen against these peaceful dissenters, and we today have formed the National Council for Civil Liberties to keep watch over the whole spirit of liberty in our country." And that's the organisation that I represent today. It's a great privilege to represent Liberty's members. I hope some of you are Liberty members or might become Liberty members. I know that so many of you will be friends and supporters. And our struggle and our story, that's now nearly 80 years old, is one of great adversity, great challenge, but also of successes, and also one of hope. And in my experience, sometimes in the darkest moments, in the moments of greatest adversity, the opportunity for the change can also come. But let's talk a little about the challenge. From the start of the international human rights movement, it was founded in memories of the Holocaust. There would be no Universal Declaration on Human Rights if there had not been the horrors and the terrors of World War II. And that is why, let's be clear, the founders of those precious documents, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the European Convention on Human Rights, and all the other related instruments, knew that this had to be rights for human beings, not rights just for citizens. There had to be some inalienable dignity, equal treatment and fairness that was owed to every single human being just because they were alive. That's every newborn baby and every newly arrived asylum seeker. Not because they're good or bad, not because they've yet paid taxes or made some other contribution to society, but just because they're a human being. And that is so important. That's the difference between human rights and citizens' privileges. And this generation, this wartime and post-war generation all over the world had seen graphically and horrifyingly what can happen when you allow human rights to be stripped away at the whim of governments and human rights to be contingent on nationality or other privileged status. And that is why it is no accident at all, it's completely deliberate, that these documents are about human beings and not about nationals of any particular country or any particular region. You could say that the Universal Declaration on Human Rights and all the associated conventions are the world trying to learn a lesson from the Holocaust, but you could also say that the Refugee Convention itself is the world's apology for doing too little, too late to prevent that particular atrocity. I would say that, therefore, this post-war moment has been the most important moment in world history for the development of rights and freedoms, and it's been a very important moment in liberty's journey as well. This idea that we're all entitled to our dignity, to equal treatment and fairness just because we are alive. And this idea also that if human rights are to mean anything, they have to ultimately be protected by an independent judiciary and the rule of law. And that, to be effective, means that people do need access to lawyers and access to the courtroom. They need advice and representation if these rights are to mean anything in practice. Now we fast forward to 2012, this very unsettled, sometimes scary moment as well. The economic crisis, combined with globalisation and so many challenges and fears around the world, make it a very difficult moment for the human rights ideal. Once more we see the rise of xenophobia that comes with people's fears all over Europe and potentially all over the world, fears for their livelihoods and their future and their economic prospects for their families and so on. It seems to me that societies and world movements can go in one or other direction at such a moment. They can cling to the best in human civilization and tradition, to the best values and to the lessons of the past, or they can forget those lessons and repeat mistakes once made and lurch into extremism, xenophobia, racism, clinging to the privileges that particular racial or national groups want for themselves and ignoring the other. But this mistake, that of course has been made all over the world at many times in human history, is particularly disastrous in 2012. In this shrinking, interconnected world in which we all live, national borders are more and more meaningless. People can communicate with each other over the internet, they can be prosecuted around the world and persecuted around the world for things that they did in a completely different jurisdiction as oppressive governments assert jurisdiction over the web. In this shrinking, interconnected world of ours, where we're constantly told that people and nations have to work together to combat climate change and poverty and terrorism and so many of the world's ills, how ironic that the same governments do not want us to come together to share our common humanity and to support international human rights ideals.